those in the libertarian camp, quite frequently, questions about overly overt patriotism when it comes to, the flag maybe symbolizing the wars that we're in. Maybe you want to suggest that true patriotism means we shouldn't be going to these wars. But all of a sudden, there's this alliance between government and government money where they advertise on there, and all of a sudden it has changed. The attitude has changed several years back, and as much as I believe we should respect the flag and our country, there's something about military always being at the football game, and a flag as big as the football field. Yeah. And I understand that it hasn't been forever that they played the national anthem at football games. It sort of came along when they have to build up this, super strong support for military to justify the wars that they're doing. Subtly, that's what they're doing. If you can praise the military and thank you for their service and never ask you, what was your service? Oh, I went over and killed a bunch of people, and I bombed somebody over there, even though they didn't do any harm. They never raised that question, but they worked this in, and I didn't like what the NFL was doing with their allegiance to the patriotism. So they're really in the middle right now, of this squabble, because some of them were sympathetic to Trump, and then he steps over the boundaries, and they say, well, we have to back off. But I don't like this symbiosis with our federal government actually providing money to the NFL.
Well, I think
NFL teams stayed in locker rooms for Anthem until 2009, then DoD began paying for patriotism. For decades, NFL teams sat in the locker room during the anthem. Only in 2009 and after did teams start showing up and get paid for their patriotism. By J. Sermopoulos, September 25, 2017. President Trump's condemnation of NFL players that choose to kneel, rather than stand for the national anthem, reignited a national debate that began with Colin Kaepernick's decision not to stand for the anthem last season as a protest against police brutality. Over the weekend, a plethora of players and even entire teams chose to either kneel or stay in the locker room during the playing of the national anthem, while many NFL owners released statements eliciting support for players who choose not to stand. What many people are missing in this debate is the fact that prior to 2009, NFL teams did not generally stand for the anthem. While having the option to do so individually if they chose to, most of the time they stayed in the locker room during this pregame ritual. In fact, Tommy Curran of Comcast Sportsnet New England reported, in August 2016, that NFL spokesman Brian McCarthy confirmed that the now common practice of players standing on the field together for the national anthem only began in 2009. Advertisement. NFL spokesman Brian McCarthy confirmed this morning the practice began in 2009, adding, as you know, the NFL has a long tradition of patriotism. Players are encouraged but not required to stand for the anthem. Additionally, it has come to light that many of the patriotic pregame displays in the NFL are simply propaganda displays that were paid for by the U.S. Department of Defense and the National Guard, meaning that these displays were actually paid for by the American taxpayers. These displays of patriotic propaganda, called paid patriotism, were brought to light in April 2015, when Arizona Senator Jeff Flake released a statement condemning the practice. Read more. It's time to pay attention. In the last 24 hours, Trump admin has pushed US to the brink of WW3. Then in November 2015, Flake and fellow Arizona Republican Senator John McCain issued a report stating that the U.S. Department of Defense had been paying the NFL for patriotic displays in football and other sports between 2011 and 2014. Contrary to the public statements made by DoD and the NFL, the majority of the contracts, 72 of the 122 contracts we analyzed, clearly show that DoD paid for patriotic tributes at professional football, baseball, basketball, hockey, and soccer games. These paid tributes included on-field color guard, enlistment and re-enlistment ceremonies, performances of the national anthem, full field flag details, ceremonial first pitches and puck drops. The National Guard paid teams for the opportunity to sponsor military appreciation nights and to recognize its birthday. It paid the Buffalo Bills to sponsor its salute to the service game. DoD even paid teams for the opportunity to perform surprise welcome home promotions for troops returning from deployments and to recognize wounded warriors. While well-intentioned, we wonder just how many of these displays included a disclaimer that these events were in fact sponsored by the DoD at taxpayer expense. Even with that disclosure, it is hard to understand how a team accepting taxpayer funds to sponsor a military appreciation game, or to recognize wounded warriors or returning troops, can be construed as anything other than paid patriotism. In total, the Department of Defense paid 14 NFL teams $5.4 million from 2011 to 2014 for patriotic propaganda during NFL games. U.S. Senator Jeff Flake, R. Arizona, called the spending wasteful spending that leaves a bad taste in your mouth. Those of us go to sporting events and see them honoring the heroes, Flake said in an interview. You get a good feeling in your heart. Then to find out they're doing it because they're compensated for it, it leaves you underwhelmed. It seems a little unseemly. They realize the public believes they're doing it as a public service or a sense of patriotism, Flake continued. It leaves a bad taste in your mouth. Former Congressman Ron Paul released a video condemning the practice, asking, "Read more, Trump's drug czar pick exposed for being on Big Pharma's payroll. Do you know why the NFL has become so gung-ho with military propaganda? It's because the US government pays them to do it. So, our money is taken from us, and given to the NFL, in order to propagandize us to support the empire's wars. That has to stop." The report by Senators Flake and McCain did not cover the years prior to 2011, thus having no way to verify whether this paid patriotism program began in 2009, the year NFL teams began taking to the field as a team for the national anthem. However, logic would seem to indicate that it was not an organic manifestation given the widespread proclivity of teams and players to stay in the locker room during the anthem for decades prior to 2009. The fact that all the teams in the NFL decided during the 2009 season to start coming to the field early for the national anthem seems to indicate that these actions, which were the exact behaviors pushed for in the paid patriotism propaganda program, were not organic, but begun as part of the Department of Defense propaganda program. And, while the public argues over whether or not players should stand or kneel, there is no debate that this is government-sponsored propaganda that is meant to indoctrinate people into supporting an imperial war machine that fights not for America and freedom, but for geopolitical power, access to energy resources, and hegemonic control of the global economic system as predicated by the petrodollar. Please share this story to help awaken people to the fact that these patriotic displays are actually paid patriotism propaganda brought to you by the U.S. Department of Defense.
Does the government work for us or do we work for the government? Tonight, what if the Constitution no longer applied? What if the whole purpose of the Constitution was to limit the government? What if Congress's enumerated powers in the Constitution no longer limited Congress, but were actually used as a justification to extend Congress's authority over every realm of human life? What if the president, meant to be an equal to Congress, has instead become a democratically elected, term-limited monarch? What if the president assumed that everything he did was legal just because he's the president? What if he could interrupt your regularly scheduled radio and TV programming for a special message from him? What if he could declare war on his own? What if he could read your emails and your texts without a search warrant? What if he could kill you without warning? What if Supreme Court justices no longer looked to the Constitution to determine the constitutionality of a law, but rather simply to what justices who preceded them thought about it? What if the rights and principles guaranteed in the Constitution have been so distorted in the past 200 years as to be unrecognizable by the founders? What if the 50 states were no longer sovereign entities, equals to each other, and parents of the federal government they voluntarily constituted? What if the states were mere provinces of a totally nationalized and fully centralized government? What if the Constitution was amended stealthily, not by constitutional amendments duly ratified by the states, but by the constant and persistent expansion of the federal government's role in our lives? What if the federal government decided if its own powers were proper and constitutional? What if the Constitution were no longer the supreme law of the land? What if you needed a license from the government to speak, to assemble, or to protest against the government? What if the government didn't like what you planned to say, and so it didn't give you the license? What if the right to keep and bear arms only applied to the government? What if posse comitatus, the federal law that prohibits our military from occupying our streets, were no longer in effect? What if the government considered the military an adequate dispenser of domestic law enforcement? What if cops looked and acted like troops and you couldn't distinguish the military from the police? What if you were not secure in your person, in your papers, and in your property? What if federal agents could write their own search warrants in defiance of the Constitution? What if the government could decide when you were and were not entitled to a jury trial? What if the government could take your property whenever it wanted? What if the government could continue prosecuting you until it got the verdict it wanted? What if the government could force you to testify against yourself simply by labeling you a domestic terrorist? What if the government could torture you until you said what the government wanted to hear? What if people running for president actually supported torture? What if the government tortured your children to get to you? What if government judges and government lawyers intimidated juries into convicting the innocent? What if the government could send you to your death and your innocence meant nothing so long as the government's procedures were followed? What if America's prison population, the largest in the world, was a cruel and unusual way for a country to be free? What if half the prison population never harmed anyone but themselves? What if the people had no rights except those the government chose to let them have? What if the states had no rights except to do as the federal government commanded? What if our elected officials didn't really live among us, but instead all had their hearts and homes in Washington, D.C.? What if the government could strip you of your rights because of where your mother was when you were born? What if the income tax was unconstitutional? What if the states were convinced to give up their representation in Congress? What if the government tried to ban you from using a substance in your body that is older than the government itself? What if voting didn't mean anything anymore because both political parties stand for big government? What if the government could write any law, regulate any behavior, and tax any event? The Constitution be damned. What if the government was the reason we don't have a Constitution anymore? What if you could love your country but hate what the government has done to it? What if sometimes to love your country you had to alter or abolish the government? What if Jefferson was right? What if that government is best which governs least? What if I'm right? What if the government is wrong? What if it is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong? What if it is better to perish fighting for freedom than to live as a slave? What if freedom's greatest hour of danger is now?
Hey Charlotte County, this is Charlotte County COPWATCH, and I'd like to thank you for all your years of support through the years. As a result, this channel has grown and allowed me an equity partnership in carmarshal.com. Please take the time to check them out. They help you buy and sell your next car, even have a negotiating tool to save you from the hassle of haggling with multiple dealers. The link is in the description below. Please click and help support and give if you can too through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks again.